Your canned goods have an expiry date, and so does the plan built around them. Walk into that pantry right now. Feel the cool metal under your fingertips, the faint metallic smell of sealed tin, the satisfying weight of a can that feels like insurance. You've stacked them carefully. You've rotated the dates. You've done everything the preparedness forums told you to do. But in 3 to 5 years, the best case scenario, those cans begin to corrode from the inside out. The lining degrades. The contents oxidize. And the food that was supposed to carry you through a collapse starts quietly becoming the problem. Viking sailors crossing the North Atlantic in open longships didn't have a pantry. They didn't have tin. They didn't have refrigeration or vacuum sealing or USDA-approved processing facilities. And yet they ate, reliably for months at sea in brutal conditions, from stores that outlasted anything you currently own. That is not mythology. That is preserved meat and fish that historians have traced back over 1,000 years. What they knew, and what was quietly buried under the convenience economy, is the reason you're here. The modern canning industry is built on a shelf life of 2 to 5 years under ideal conditions. And ideal is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. The FDA's own guidance acknowledges that high-acid canned goods, your tomatoes, your fruits, which begin losing nutritional integrity and structural quality within 18 months. Low-acid goods hold longer in theory, but every temperature fluctuation in your storage space, a garage that hits 90 degrees Fahrenheit in July, a basement that dips to freezing in February, chips away at that timeline. The steel itself is the enemy. Tin-coated steel cans are engineered for retail distribution cycles, not decade-long survival scenarios. A 2019 analysis from the University of California Davis Food Science Division found that BPA free can linings, the replacement for the original chemical coating, still showed measurable degradation of flavor compounds and micronutrient content within 36 months of sealing. You weren't told that at the checkout. You were told to buy more. The Vikings called it saltfisk and saltkjöt, salt fish and salt meat, and by 900 AD it was the backbone of Norse winter survival and oceanic exploration. New excavations at Norse settlement sites in Greenland and Iceland have uncovered salted provisions in clay and wooden vessels that, by the preserved organic record, had remained edible for periods exceeding 2 years without any refrigeration whatsoever. This was not a crude folk method. It was a refined, repeatable technology passed down with the same seriousness as shipbuilding. The civilization that crossed the Atlantic before Columbus did it on salt-cured protein. That is the credential. Salt preserves food through a mechanism called osmosis. And osmosis is simply the movement of water from where there is more of it to where there is less. When you pack meat or fish in a dense layer of salt, the salt has an extremely low water concentration. The moisture inside the muscle cells, which is abundant by comparison, begins migrating outward through the cell walls toward the salt. This is not a chemical reaction in the reactive, explosive sense. It is physics. The water moves because physics demands equilibrium. Within hours, the surface of the meat is visibly wet as cellular fluid draws out. Within 24 to 48 hours and a sufficient salt concentration, the water activity inside the tissue, the measurement food scientists use to describe how much free water is available for microbial life, drops below the critical threshold of 0.85. Below 0.85 water activity, the vast majority of pathogenic bacteria, including Salmonella and E. coli, cannot replicate. They don't need to be killed. They simply cannot function. Think of it this way. Bacteria are like a factory that runs on water pressure. The moment you drain the reservoir, the whole operation shuts down. Salt doesn't poison the bacteria so much as it cuts their power supply entirely. That is what makes this method self-reinforcing rather than time-dependent. The lower the water activity drops, the more hostile the environment becomes, and the longer the protection holds. The second layer of preservation is what food microbiologists call halophilic inhibition, the suppression of even salt-tolerant organisms. True halophiles, bacteria that can thrive in high-salt environments, exist, but they are not the organisms responsible for foodborne illness. The dangerous pathogens are halophobe or halotolerant at best, meaning high salt concentrations either kill them outright or reduce their growth rate to functionally zero. At a salt concentration of 10% by weight, which is achievable with table-level curing ratios, botulism-producing Clostridium botulinum is effectively suppressed. At 20%, a full saturation brine, the environment becomes hostile to nearly all spoilage organisms. The Romans documented this principle without naming it. Their salted fish, garum and salsamenta, were traded across an empire for centuries because the method worked consistently. The science that explains why was formalized by microbiologists in the 20th century. But the result was already well understood by anyone who had survived on it for 1,000 years. The USDA's Complete Guide to Home Preservation, current edition, validates brine concentrations above 15% as effective long-term preservation environments for protein, exactly what the Norse were running empirically. You need 3 things to do this correctly. First, the salt, not iodized table salt. Iodine is added to prevent thyroid deficiency in the modern diet. But it actively interferes with fermentation and curing by inhibiting the lactic acid bacteria that support the preservation environment. Use pure sodium chloride, labeled as kosher salt, curing salt, or non-iodized sea salt. The grain size matters less than the purity. Second, the protein. Firm-fleshed fish, cod, mackerel, herring, and dense muscle meats such as pork leg or beef brisket cure most reliably. High-fat cuts can go rancid at the fat layer even when the muscle is stable. So trim surface fat to under a quarter inch before curing. Third, the vessel. Food-grade ceramic crocks, glass jars with wide mouths, or food-safe wooden barrels, never reactive metal. The salt will corrode aluminium and impart a metallic taint. Clean, inert, and sealable. Begin by calculating your salt ratio. For a dry cure, you need 30 grams of non-iodized salt per 100 grams of protein. A 30% salt-to-meat ratio by weight. Weigh both before you start. Guessing produces inconsistent results. Rinse the protein under cold water and pat it completely dry with clean cloth. Any standing surface moisture dilutes the initial salt contact and slows the draw. Coat every surface of the meat or fish uniformly and heavily. There should be no bare patch larger than a thumbnail. This is not seasoning. This is a structural barrier, and any gap is an entry point. Layer the salted protein into your vessel. I ain't placing additional dry salt between each layer. Roughly 10 grams per layer as a floor bed and ceiling. Press each layer down firmly to eliminate air pockets. Air pockets trap moisture and create anaerobic environments where the wrong organisms can establish before the salt concentration reaches full effect. Once the vessel is packed, place a weight on top. A clean, flat stone, a sealed jar of water, anything that maintains downward pressure. Work in a cool space. If the ambient temperature is above 65 degrees Fahrenheit during the initial cure period, slow the process intentionally and check daily. Over the first 48 hours, you will see significant liquid accumulation at the bottom of the vessel. This is called the purge. It is the drawn moisture leaving the protein. Do not discard it immediately. It is becoming a natural brine. After 72 hours, assess the purge volume. If it has not fully submerged the protein, supplement with a prepared brine. Dissolve 200 grams of non-iodized salt in 1 liter of cold water, a 20% solution by weight, and add enough to cover all surfaces. Seal the vessel. Store it at a consistent temperature between 50 degrees Fahrenheit and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, a root cellar, a cool basement corner, a garage in temperate months. Consistency matters more than exact temperature. Fluctuation is the enemy of stability. At this point, the cure is self-maintaining. Check at 30 days. A properly cured protein will be firm to the touch, darker in color, and will carry a clean, briny smell, not a sour or ammonia-forward odor. A sour or ammonia note means surface contamination, usually from a gap in coverage. Trim the affected surface generously and resalt. Salt-cured protein stored correctly at 20% brine concentration has a documented minimum shelf life of 12 months without refrigeration. Traditional Norse and North Atlantic fishing communities routinely held stores for 18 to 24 months as standard practice, not emergency extension. The Smithsonian's Food History Archives document salt cod caches recovered from 18th century maritime vessels that remain technically edible after more than 3 years. Modern food science corroborates this. A peer-reviewed 2021 study in the Journal of Food Protection confirmed that equilibrium salt concentrations above 18% in whole muscle protein maintained safe water activity levels below 0.80 across a 14-month controlled observation period with zero refrigeration. Your canned goods cannot make that claim once the lining begins to fail. Run the numbers honestly. A 50-pound bag of food-grade non-iodized salt costs between $12 and $18 at most agricultural supply or restaurant wholesale outlets. That 50 pounds will cure approximately 165 pounds of protein at the 30% ratio. Enough preserved meat to supply a single adult with their daily protein requirement for over 8 months. The equivalent caloric and protein coverage in commercially canned goods would run between $280 and $400 at current retail pricing. I requires annual rotation to stay within label dates and produces a sustained volume of waste packaging. The salt costs you under $18. It stores indefinitely on its own. And the cured product it creates outlasts anything sealed in a tin at the factory. Callum is a former maritime tradesman in coastal Nova Scotia who began salt-curing mackerel after a 3-day power outage wiped out his freezer stock. He filled a 10-liter ceramic crock with the method above in late autumn. The following spring, 7 months later, he opened it. The fish was firm, the brine was clear, the smell was clean. He ate from it for 2 weeks without a single issue. He told the preparedness forum where he documented this that the most surprising part wasn't that it worked. It was that it was better than he expected. That outcome is not luck. That is a 1,000-year-old process doing exactly what it was built to do. The supply chain that keeps your grocery store stocked operates on a 72-hour replenishment cycle. 3 days of buffer between you and empty shelves. Your canned goods provide a temporary extension of that dependency. Salt curing doesn't extend the dependency. It ends it. Either you are building a food system that can function outside the grid, or you are building a slightly larger version of the one that will fail you. Those are the only 2 options. Your move.